Can you kind of explain where Gaza City, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv is?
You were on the coast of Israel, and you were going to go down the coast along the Mediterranean Sea toward Egypt. You would eventually hit the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip is an area that's approximately 130 square miles that extends into Israel proper and south. It looks like an L with a fat upper part and a shortened end at the bottom. And at the very end of that L, in what would be the corner of the L at the bottom, that actually touches Egypt. There's a very small corridor there that actually connects Gaza to Egypt. The rest of that extends into Israel and to the west. And if you go back to the east, you'll be in the Mediterranean Sea. So if you just make an L down the coast, what would be that strip called Gaza? And around that strip called Gaza are those cities that you mentioned, further into Israel.
Who is actually in control of the Gaza Strip? That's a question that's been asked time and time again, and I'm hoping you can help kind of break it down.
So let's do a little bit of history first. At the end of World War I, the warring parties, the victors, the Americans, the British, the French, and others, took land from the losers, the Austro-Hungarian regime and the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, which you can think of sort of as Turkey, but it was much larger than Turkey. It was Turkey going all the way up into Eastern Europe, going all the way across into what was then the Sahel. We now call that Northeast Africa, which later became Northeast Africa, or the Middle East, which the countries of Jordan, Syria, and now Israel. But at that point, it was Palestine and Transjordan. They weren't actually countries. They were just areas. Yeah, Jordan was inhabited by Jordanians, and Palestine was inhabited by Palestinians. But as World War II ended, Jews from Europe were moving in to Palestine to flee the tyranny and the death camps and the war in Europe. When the parties had divided this up at the end of World War I, Britain got control of that Palestine Transjordan area. Britain maintained that control for almost 3 decades. And at the end of World War II in 1948, it said, we're going to give up our mandate. And the mandate basically was an international contract for Britain, Great Britain at the time, to administer and run that part of the world. They said they were going to give it up. And as they did that, the Palestinians who were there and the Jews who had moved in were in conflict. The UN, the new UN now, this new entity says, okay, we're going to divide this up, and we're going to have 2 sovereign states. One's going to be a Palestinian state, one's going to be a Jewish state. And at the end of that, we're going to have some type of economic union between the two, but they'll be sovereignly separate. The fighting basically put that to an end because the Jewish, what became the IDF, was able to defeat the combined Palestinian and Arab armies and push them out of what we now can look at to be Israel. The 2 areas that they weren't able to push them completely out of are what are now controlled by the Palestinians. One is the West Bank, and one is Gaza, the Gaza Strip. Gaza City is in the Gaza Strip. And that became a Palestinian enclave. Later, after more fighting between Arab nations and the Palestinians with the Israelis, Israel put a sea blockade and a land, not a blockade, but a land enclosure encampment around Gaza to keep the Palestinians in because of the fighting. And where we are now is there was a point in time in 2005 when this Gaza administration of the Palestinian Authority, which still administers the West Bank, lost power to Hamas. And Hamas took over control of Gaza while the Palestinian Authority remained in control of the West Bank in the north. They're both Palestinian enclaves, but they're ruled by and run by two separate entities. The Palestinian Authority has made a relative peace with Israel, and they are cooperative with each other in the north to the greater extent. Hamas, on the other hand, maintains its initial posture, destruction of Israel, and is against anything that the Israeli state has essentially stands for in its existence, because they believe that that land should have been fully Palestine. And that conflict has continued. We saw another example of it this weekend. And those Palestinians in the Strip have some legitimate complaints against the authority of Israel, but it's not a legitimate complaint that can be solved or should be accepted as attempted to be solved through terrorism.
Can you break down for me why the USS Gerald R. Ford is being positioned where it is? Because that's something that's been discussed a lot recently as well. Can you kind of help break that down?
So the United States Navy, leaning forward, I used to have a sign on my office wall that showed an aircraft carrier written in a pencil sketch, and around that it said 90,000 tons of diplomacy. So you go to bed at night and you wake up in the morning, and 400 miles off your coast is the United States aircraft carrier and the battle group able to project power onto the land from where they sit. So the United States has interests in this area, not just in supporting an ally, which Israel is, but also there are American troops on the ground in Syria, there are American troops on the ground in Iraq, there are American troops in other locations in that vicinity that could be threatened by the individuals in support of Hamas and others, because they think it's a good time to take a jump, to take a leap, and to engage the Americans. If the Americans there need support and help, that would come from that battle group off the coast, as well as from other places. So that's one reason. Another reason is when I was an active duty Navy officer, one of the things we did was a evacuation of people from a country then in revolution, Liberia in Africa. The Navy and the Marine Corps went into those areas and was able to remove not only Americans, but French, Spanish, Italians, lots of other folks. And at a side point, any of the people who came on board who were pregnant, who had a baby on board, actually that child became an American citizen because that was American territory. In any event, the battle group can do those type of things. So we have hostages we know that are Americans that are in those locations. Should the opportunity arise, could American forces be utilized to rescue American hostages? Well, that would obviously is a decision from very high up in the Pentagon and in the president's office. But in order to do those things, in order to consider those things, you have to have assets in place. Lastly, if there was a time and a place when the United States was going to support Israel. It's now. And one of the things they can support them with is intelligence. That ship has assets on board that can gather intelligence that could help the Israelis. It has supplies, which can be transferred to the Israelis, and the battle group has supplies, which can be transferred to the Israelis. So there's multiple pronged reasons why the forward battle group is now where it is.
How could something like this happen? That's a question that so many people have. I imagine it's going to be investigated, but how could something like this, a surprise attack, something that has never been seen before, happen on the Israeli people?
Well, we asked ourselves about that from Pearl Harbor and 9/11, and the Israelis asked themselves about the Yom Kippur War in the same manner. It's an intelligence failure. So for us, on 9/11, it was FBI, CIA, and others. For Israel, this weekend, it was Mossad and IDF intelligence, Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, intelligence wing, failed to observe and receive warnings, indications and warnings, which is the intelligence language for something's happening. I look at it, it causes me to be concerned, and I investigate it, gather more intelligence, and then give the information to my boss to potentially take action. So the indications and warnings methods that the Israelis were trying to use in this area failed. And as a result, Hamas was able to train people in paragliders that were used to fly over Israeli defenses, which carried individual machine guns, and they were able to fly over fleeing concert goers and gun them down in the desert, and other things. They were able to practice breaching the walls with construction equipment and bombs. They were able to practice quick maneuver on the ground into those locations by people on mopeds and motorbikes in the lead who could quickly gain ground and get into the location, followed by folks in trucks and in ground troops who didn't have the ability to move as fast. They're able to do all of that and practice all of that for an unknown period of time. I saw one video which indicated that they were doing this much earlier in this year and maybe even last year. All those things were undiscovered by the Mossad or the IDF intelligence organization. And thirdly, they needed a big friend to do this. This takes money. So the theories right now are that the money to do all this came from Iran. So Mossad, the U.S., and everybody else who has an intelligence operation against Iran also failed to be able to see and detect wherever that money trail was that went to Hamas, if it was the Iranians who did it.
Does it seem from what we've seen here that this violence and this war could go on for a while? Is there any end in sight, or are we looking at weeks, months of a war?
That's a tough prediction. So at some point in time, the Israeli Air Force and missile operators, etc., will run out of viable targets. Will that cause the Hamas fighters to dissipate and no longer be a threat? Probably not. Will that allow Israel to get back the hostages, 130 plus, from multiple nations? Probably not. So in order to actually go in and take territory and hold it in order to look for these hostages, there may have to be a ground attack. And Israel has mounted its forces on the outside of Gaza to be able to move in and to do this. That's now urban combat. That's slow, it's ugly, it's dangerous, and it causes lots of death for the fighters themselves and for the civilians who are in and around the fighting.
we've already seen some involvement. We touched on this, so I want to go in reverse here, but some involvement on the part of the U.S. We know President Biden spoke over the weekend and pledged his support to Israel. He's expected to do the same later on today. How involved do we expect the U.S. is going to get in this whole situation?
Well, we're going to be very involved in support of our ally. Will troops on the ground involved? No. But will it involve providing, in many ways, some of the things we've provided to Ukraine in terms of being able to have their military forces or their intelligence forces do what they need to do? In Ukraine, the Russian flagship of the Black Sea Fleet the Moskva was sunk. It was sunk in part because the United States gave Ukraine intelligence about where that ship was and how that ship was moving, and the Ukrainians were able to then utilize that and put that ship at the bottom of the sea. The United States is providing Israel, I'm sure, actionable intelligence as it comes upon it, so that the Israelis can use it to take out Hamas fighters wherever they can.
All right. Robert Sanders, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. You're a friend of the show, and you always help break all of this stuff down for us. Is there anything else that you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, so just a little bit more of the historical background. So the Aziz ad-Din al-Qassam is the name of the Hamas military arm. And that's named after a Muslim cleric who was an individual who resisted the colonial empires that occupied what we now consider to be Israel, Syria, parts of Jordan, and the areas that are now under the rule of Palestinians. He fought them, he fought the British, he fought Zionism, he fought all of that, seeking to get the Palestinians what he believed to be their own homeland. And the people who are fighting now fight under his name as the name of their organization. So this goes way back. This is not a new thing. This is something that has been here for a while. And between Israel and its neighbors, they haven't fixed it, and between the United States and the UN and the other countries have also not fixed it. There's progress. There's progress being made in that a couple of Arab countries have recently recognized Israel and started diplomatic relations and accept Israel's right to exist, past what President Carter did with Egypt in the Camp David Accords. The next thing on that table was about to be a similar engagement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. If that happened, that puts Iran, Saudi Arabia's arch enemy in the region, in a more defensive posture. So if in fact the Iranians were the ones funding this, they were funding this for their own interest, to keep these alliances, or at least these normalizations of relations between other Arab countries and Israel. Because Iran, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, is an enemy of Israel.
All right. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to be here. We appreciate it.
You take care, Josh.
You too.
Have a good day.